One bright, ordinary morning, Peter Griffin was eagerly packing his fishing gear, ready to set out for a day on the water with his buddies. But just as he was reaching for his lucky bait, Lois intercepted him with a reminder. They'd planned a family weekend. Peter, as deft at dodging family obligations as he was at scoring cheap beer, reassured Lois with a hasty promise to make it up to her. "Just a quick trip, honey." Before hightailing it to Quahog Harbor, he and Joe arrived at the dock, only to find themselves stranded in awkward silence since Quagmire, the usual ringleader of conversation, was running late. After a series of half-hearted attempts to make small talk that fizzled faster than Joe's enthusiasm for fishing, the pair decided to check on Quagmire at his house. They found Quagmire, but not in any way they expected. In the middle of his living room, he was hanging from the ceiling, unconscious and very much compromised, the unfortunate result of some ill-conceived autoerotic asphyxiation mishap. Realizing they couldn't just leave him there, Peter and Joe frantically rushed him to the hospital, where he was quickly whisked away in critical condition. The entire Griffin family was soon gathered in the hospital waiting room, where Peter, with a tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather, announced that Quagmire's sister Brenda was flying in, and bringing her notorious, volatile boyfriend Jeff. Miraculously, Quagmire pulled through, albeit to the sound of Brenda's unique rendition of an old family hymn she was singing at his bedside. The hymn somehow managed to combine cryptic notes of prophecy with a tune that made everyone's skin crawl. Quagmire's eyes eventually fluttered open, perhaps more out of an attempt to stop the singing than from medical resilience. However, their tender reunion was short-lived as Jeff immediately barked at Brenda, pulling her away with a sneer and muttering something about wasting time with this weakling. Lois and Peter escorted Quagmire back to his place, but that night, the walls of Quagmire's home echoed with the relentless, toxic arguments between Brenda and Jeff, so intense that even the neighbors started complaining. The following morning, an exhausted, baggy-eyed Quagmire showed up at the Griffin's doorstep. He politely requested Lois's womanly expertise to help talk some sense into his sister. Lois agreed, and later that day, she and Brenda met up at a diner. Lois immediately noticed that Brenda was wearing sunglasses indoors. When Lois gently asked her to take them off, she was shocked to find Brenda sporting a nasty, swollen black eye. Lois wasted no time expressing her concerns, explaining that Jeff's behavior was not love but abuse. Brenda, however, dismissed Lois's words, explaining that Jeff's rough love was his way of showing he cared. She insisted he only hurt her because he loved her so much. Later that evening at the bar, a deeply concerned Quagmire vented to Joe and Peter, revealing that Jeff had been abusing Brenda nonstop for days. Peter wondered if Joe, being a cop, could arrest Jeff. But Joe explained that without a formal complaint from Brenda, his hands were tied. Quagmire, growing increasingly anxious, admitted his fears that one day Jeff might actually kill her. Joe suggested holding an intervention, a surprise party without cake or presents. They planned it out, and a few days later, Brenda walked into the Griffin's living room only to find the entire family, Joe, his wife, and Quagmire gathered in a somber circle. They were ready to confront Brenda about how her relationship with Jeff had affected everyone, and hopefully open her eyes to the danger she was in. But just as Brenda was settling in, Jeff barged in, practically vibrating with rage. In a bizarre twist, Brenda announced that she and Jeff were getting married. And she was pregnant with his child. The room went silent, jaws dropped. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire exchanged worried glances, realizing that reasoning with Brenda was a losing battle. With Brenda now more tied to Jeff than ever, the three friends decided it was time to help Jeff understand boundaries. They invited Jeff on a midnight hunting trip. Once in the forest, though, Jeff proved he was as dangerous as he was mean. He turned on them, effortlessly throwing Peter and Joe to the ground and hauling Quagmire into the car, taking him on a brutal ride deep into the woods. There, Jeff forced Quagmire out, beating him senseless and finally pinning him to the ground. He began digging a shallow grave while taunting Quagmire. Summoning the last of his strength and wits, Quagmire managed to scramble back to the driver's seat. With a surge of adrenaline, he rammed the car into Jeff, knocking him back against a tree. At dawn, Quagmire, battered but alive, returned home. Brenda awoke to find a note from Jeff, scrawled in barely legible handwriting, explaining that he had left her for good. In the note, he warned her to tell the police that Peter, Joe, and Quagmire had been with her all night. An alibi to cover the trio's tracks. Stunned and alone, Brenda stared at the note, feeling a mixture of relief and heartache. She folded it carefully, a strange peace settling over her as she realized Jeff would never return.